We're in what I call the perpetual whitewater of change. We go from change to change to change to change. It's not like kayaking on a river and you go through the rapids and then have these calm, placid stretches. Those calm, placid stretches don't exist anymore. Be kind, because everyone is fighting a great battle. Slogans are worthless because they're the words on the walls, and actions are priceless because they're the happenings in the halls. It's how people interact with each other.
Today's episode of the HR L&D podcast is sponsored by Deal. Now take a moment, if you would, to consider the following pre-show scenario. Imagine you had to visit 16 houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots, another has the pans, another has the stove, and another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate exactly the same way, using 16 different tools and platforms to hire, manage, and pay their workforce. But now there's one platform that does it all, and that's today's sponsor. That's Deal. That's DEEL. And Deal is the all-in-one platform built for global work. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, from automated onboarding to performance assessments and beyond, you can manage the entire worker lifecycle all under one roof. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries, or run payroll in over 100 countries. Even offer competitive benefits, equity, and equipment. With Deal's industry-leading suite of HR tools, payroll solutions, and compliance services, you can scale globally with unmatched speed and expertise. So are you ready to transform your global HR system? If you are, click in the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL. Welcome back to the HR L&D podcast. My name is Nick Day. I'm CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist HR recruiters. And I'm also the host of this wonderful show. And thank you ever so much for joining me again today. Of course, if you haven't had a chance yet to review the show, please do remember to do so. And please do share this with all of your colleagues and friends so that together we can really raise the profile of human resources worldwide. And someone who's going to help us do that today is my esteemed guest. I'm hugely excited about speaking to Dr. Thom Mayer today. He is a distinguished crisis management expert who's known for his significant roles, including medical director for the NFL Players Association and a clinical professor of emergency medicine at George Washington University. He was also very well known for his leadership during the 9/11 Pentagon Rescue operation and for his innovative approach to sports medicine in the NFL, particularly around concussion management. Now, Dr. Thom Mayer also has a new book. We're going to find out all about that during the course of the show. So I'll look forward to bringing that to your attention. But without further ado, welcome to the HR L&D podcast, Dr. Thom Mayer. How are you feeling today?
I'm very well, Nick. I'm very excited about this. I admire your work, and I think it's absolutely critical to how we move our organizations, our teams, and ourselves forward. So I've been looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, you and me both. And obviously, actually not the first NFL associated professional I've had on the show either. We've had a few sports professionals on the show in the past. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Before we do that, I wondered if you could just bring your career to light a little bit, because I don't think I've quite done it justice in that introduction. When we know a little bit more about you, I think that'd be great for our listeners, and then we can dive into the human resources question that will follow.
Well, I'm really just a simple person, Midwestern boy, born and raised. Never, doctors to me were people that sewed up lacerations when I got injured in football, and I really had no exposure to that. I was a football player and a theology major in college, which didn't exactly prepare, or maybe it prepared me perfectly for being a physician. But, I've been very fortunate to have been asked numerous times to step up in the midst of some of the bigger crises of our generation and play an important role. So that's, as it always is, the chance to lead in times of crisis is an honor, not a onerous thing that comes to us. So it's an honor to be on your show as well.
Fantastic. Well, I prefaced it by asking for an introduction for a reason. Just before the listeners got to hear my introduction, I said to you, Dr. Thom Mayer, the first question I ask all of my guests is this: what do the words human resources mean to you? And just to prepare you for that question to come. And you went, Nick, I've dealt with crisis all my life. That's not going to be a problem. So here we go. What do the words human resources mean to you?
Well, in some respects, I think it's a misleading term only because it doesn't get to what I think is critical, which is that, as you mentioned the book, the title is Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless, which might be counterintuitive to your audience. But the concept is that leadership is simply something you say, and anyone can say anything. But leading is priceless because it's what you do all day, every single person. And so when you look at human resources leading development, to play on the title a bit, everyone does that. That's not the C-suite, that's the we-suite. That's every single person in every organization, on every team, and in every family as well. So human resources to me is leading development, leadership development if you prefer. But that's the key, is helping other people lead their lives in a productive, helpful way, both to themselves and to their teams, and frankly, to their personal lives, their families, the people they interact with. So to me, it's underappreciated, possibly misnamed, because it has the connotation of, filling slots. And that's far, in my opinion, far from what human resources does. It recruits, retains, and trains talent, which is the core of any organization, in ways that can be deeply, deeply meaningful.
I couldn't agree more. What I find really interesting, and of course you've done this, and I'd love to bring this to the fore for our listeners again, which is sometimes the leaders really come through when we're in a crisis, right? And you may have a leadership title in the way that you put it with your book. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just because you're in a leadership title actually doesn't mean they're always the best people to lead when crisis comes our way, often when we least expect it, right? And that's when we really see the true leaders come through. And I think there is a shortage of leadership, in inverted commas, training, because sometimes people get into these positions of power because they're very, very good at their jobs. But actually, so the natural order of things is we must promote them to manage others because they're great at their job. But actually, their leadership qualities, their leader qualities, if you like, have never actually been assessed. It's never really been considered when they make those promotions. And what happens later on then is we end up with a skill gap. People are great at their job, but they just don't know how to lead others. And when a crisis hits, you then suddenly find the true leaders in a group will often step forward and come to the fore. I know from your side, you have firsthand experience of having to lead teams in a crisis. I'll come back to the 9/11 Pentagon attacks, where you had to really step up and be that leader, irrespective of what your title may or may not have been at that time. Tell us a little bit more about the thought process when you are in a crisis. How does that work? How do we lead even if we're not necessarily in a leadership role?
Well, I had the strange circumstance of having had dinner with Chesley Sullenberger, the Miracle on the Hudson pilot. For strange circumstances, he was in Wyoming, where we live. And at dinner, his wife was asking me, tell me about your history, your leading in times of crisis. And I said, I don't think there's any leading except in times of crisis. And she seemed surprised. She turned to Sully and said, you two have been talking. And I said, I don't understand. And Sully said, well, I always say you're not really a pilot until the engines go silent, because that aircraft, as you know, turned into a glider.
Yeah.
And that's true. I did not know that he felt that way, and that was one of his central themes. It's certainly one of mine, because that ability to prepare and not necessarily know what the crisis will be, but to be absolutely assured there will be a crisis. Not necessarily of the magnitude some of the things I've done, but that's not the point. There are crises in every team, in every person's life every day. And those micro crises, if you will, are things that we need to be prepared to step up for. Certainly at the Pentagon, that's exactly what happened. We trained for disaster medicine. We were ready for what occurred, but it never occurred to us it would occur, an aircraft 560 miles an hour flying into the southwest wall of the Pentagon. But one of the things I learned most, and I hope this isn't off-putting to anyone, but one of the things I learned at the Pentagon is it's time to stop sucking up in our lives. It's time to start sucking down. And what I mean by that is, I think in organizations, and certainly your audience is used to that concept of sucking up to the boss, guess what the boss is thinking. And that's not what helped me at the Pentagon. But there were 32 generals standing right behind me, all great people willing to help. But the way I was going to be able to lead in that crisis was by sucking down, meaning talk to the structural engineers, talk to the firefighters, talk to the paramedics, talk to the FBI evidence recovery team to secure that site so that we could get in there and find people, whether survivors or not, to recover them. And that ability to listen down, if you will, if that's a preference term instead of sucking down, is a critical piece, I think, of what we have to do. Because the people, as I say, it's not the C-suite that matters, it's the we-suite, because we have to innovate. And we can talk more about innovation if you'd like, but innovation occurs at the speed of trust, not of intelligence, integrity, genius, but of trust, the ability to trust each other. And as you say, many people get promoted to leadership positions because they may be good at their job, but not necessarily at leading others, particularly in times of crisis. So I think it all ties together in certain ways and helps us refocus, have a sharper view of what is it that we're doing, particularly in a time when workforce staffing is the major issue for most organizations. HR and leadership development become even more critical than they've been in the past.
It's interesting you use the word trust. I've had Stephen Covey on the show in the past, and obviously he promoted his book, The Trust and Inspire. And you can't inspire or get your team to follow you if you haven't first got trust established. And he makes that very clear in his book. Something that came through, though, in the response you've just given was the idea of, I get the sense that this happens automatically because you're so well trained, well versed in your craft, that when a crisis does happen, and irrespective of the severity of it, if we use the pilot example, you practice and practice and practice and practice. So when that crisis does happen and you actually have to land a plane or a helicopter, or whatever it is, when there's a crisis, you're able to do so, and you go into that autopilot, excuse the pun. And for yourself, when it's with the 9/11 Pentagon attacks, that must have been where your training really took over, and you go into that space of going, this is my field. I lead because I know what I'm doing and I practiced it. The reason I bring this up is often in the world of HR, I wonder if there's enough of that practice going on in terms of disaster that might happen, testing things that may or may not occur. We kind of sometimes go through life assuming that hacking event will never happen to us, that I don't know, whatever the crisis might be, it won't happen on our watch, so therefore I don't need to train for it. But if you were to train for it, you'd be potentially better prepared. I just wondered where that sits for you. How much of this comes into the preparation for leading? Is that a trained action, or is leading others really more instinctive?
Well, I think there are instinctive elements, but personally, I think that's overplayed a bit. I think understanding that we're in what I call the perpetual whitewater of change. We go from change to change to change to change. It's not like kayaking on a river and you go through the rapids and then have these calm, placid stretches. Those calm, placid stretches don't exist anymore. And I think the reason people ask you to speak up and lead from the front and from the front lines in times of major crises is because they've seen you do that with the micro crises, which occur all day, every day, in every person's lives. Whether that's the environmental services, the janitors, whether that's any aspect of the jobs that we do, when someone comes to you and said, I need your help, that's a crisis for them. And treating it as if it were front page of the New York Times, front page of the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, whatever your preference is, that's what you have to do, is treat every single time that occurs as if that was the biggest crisis in the world, because to that person, it is. Now, the instinctive part, I think, becomes, look, I'm an emergency physician. When disaster occurs, buildings blow up, Russia invades Ukraine, we run into the fire. There's something a little abnormal about that. And that's a bit of an instinct, if you will. But it is absolutely a joy to be asked to step up when people need you, and having the confidence to say yes. Even if you don't really know every detail of what you're going to do, that's why we have to suck down, because those people know the details. I'm not a structural engineer, but I learned from them what I needed to know to be able to say, okay, the building is safe. We can go in now.
Yeah. You mentioned innovation just before I asked the last question. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, if that's okay, because we can link this to your wonderful book. You kind of lay out your philosophy in your book. You mentioned earlier, leadership is worthless, but leading is priceless. And it focuses on I was very lucky. I got an advanced copy in digital form to have a look through the book prior to the interview. And it's wonderful. It really gives you very practical strategies of how we can lead in difficult times. But you mentioned a moment ago as well that innovation plays a big part in that. And you said, we can go deeper there if we want. I wonder if I can throw that back to you then and say, tell us a bit more about the practical strategies and how innovation plays its part.
Yeah, so there's three things I want people to do. Number one is to think about leading in times of crisis in a radically different way, not something above us, because the answers are not above us. They're within and among us.
Yeah.
Critical for HR leadership development people to understand that it's not the C-suite, it's that the answers are within us. Two is act on those things within a week. Because you know better than anyone, and so does your audience, if you're exposed to an idea and you don't act on that idea within a week, we're not going to do it. Not because we're bad people. That's the nature of human existence and the nature of human nature, if you will. But the third is to innovate, and innovate at the speed of trust. Why innovation? Because the way we're working isn't working, or it isn't working well enough. Witness the burnout rates that we see in every business, every industry, every team in which we work. So if it's true that the way we're working isn't working, then we have to innovate to do that. And innovation occurs at the speed of trust. The Irish playwright and poet, Samuel Beckett, was excellent. Ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And people will only feel free to fail and to make failure their fuel, which is a critical piece of moving forward, if they trust each other. And if it's okay to be able to make some mistakes in the course, as long as you're true to your mission, vision, and values, to what I call your deep joy that drives you on a daily basis, then you're free to innovate, even if it doesn't work or it doesn't work completely. And honestly, no innovation is completely successful. There are always things that need to be modulated, to be changed as we move forward. And those are the organizations, those are the people, in my experience, that accelerate at a astronomical light speed, because they know they're trusted. First of all, a leader is different than the boss. The boss is someone who thinks that he is the most important person in the room. But the leader is someone who knows that she is that her job is to make everyone else in the room feel that they're the most important person in the room. And that's how a team operates. That's how my NFL teams operate, is every single person. They're not all quarterbacks, but they all have a job. They know what their job is, and they feel emboldened, empowered, and free to innovate in the course of that job.
And of course, you've been on the receiving end of that trust. You give a great example in your book about where you were given the opportunity to, I think the words were, step up to medical director in that moment when something happened to an elite offensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. And someone, I think, asked you, if I recall in the book, they asked you about how you got that role. And they said, well, I was, they trusted me. Tell us that story. It's a nice one, if that's okay, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. August 1st, 2001, Corey Stringer, a tackle for the Vikings, died of heat stroke. And I tell that story not with the permission, but at the insistence of his widow and their children, because they want Corey remembered, as they should. And people say, how do you build your resume to get a job like that? Well, I got the job because Gene Upshaw, then the executive director of the NFLPA, but arguably the best left guard in the history of football, Hall of Fame player, called me and said, Doc, you're going to step up and do this job. He didn't do that because he searched resumes. It was pretty hard to do in 2001, even on the internet.
Yeah.
He did it because he trusted me. He trusted me because his youngest and my youngest boys were best friends. So we knew each other already, not in the context of football, but in the context of life. So my answer to people is don't build resumes, build relationships. That's the core to being able to lead in times of crisis, so that people will, whenever something bad, unexpected occurs, they think, hey, call Thom. Doc will know what to do.
Yeah, you make it really clear in the book as well, and you've said it already on this show. We lead every day. You said everyone is dealing with a crisis every single day. I work as a coach, and one thing I'll often say to people is everyone is dealing with something, so just be more kind. Like, we never know what someone's going through in their lives, and someone may have cut you up on the motorway or the freeway or whatever, and we get all angry, and you just don't know. Maybe they're rushing to get there for a particular reason, and we can reframe these things. The reason I bring this to the fore is the book has leadership and leaders in the title, but you're very clear. This isn't a leadership book. It's also not an anti-leadership book. It's almost a reframing of how we look at those terms, and as you've already mentioned, how they're really based on trust and other elements. With that in mind, where can we help? How can we help the listeners of this show right now start to set their own strategies up for leading more effectively? What are the key kind of things they can take away, both from the book, but also from the show today, to start them on that view that you've managed to help others get to in the way that they look at the term leadership and the term leading? Does that make sense? I guess something they can sort of...
Yeah, absolutely. And you're very wise to talk about being kind in your coaching. As you know, Philo of Alexandria, it's attributed to him, but it probably was Reverend John Watkins who said, be kind, because everyone is fighting a great battle. You know, if I'm a mom, a dad, single mom, and my kids don't want to get ready for school, you know, be kind, because they're fighting, that child is fighting the battle of getting ready to go to school, being told what to do. You mentioned the example in traffic. They may be rushing to the hospital. They may have their pregnant wife who's getting ready to deliver a baby in there. And that's a discipline. I think it is a discipline to be able to say, be kind, look at it a different way. And certainly that's, I think, where we need to go, because I talk a little bit about servant leadership in the book, as you know, from Robert Greenleaf, the great Robert Greenleaf. Yeah. But it's an idea that pervades society. Gandhi said, you know, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's also a Buddhist concept as well. And that ability to be able to serve and say, when I wake up in the morning and I get ready to swing my legs out of bed, instead of saying, how do I get to the top today? How will I lead today? How will I lead myself? How will I lead my family? How will I lead my team? And that's the core. So the book is, as you know, is intended to be a bit contrarian, not for the sake of contrarian, but to say, you know, there's some epiphanies in here that there's 60,000 leadership books on Amazon alone. And when I speak I do a fair amount of public speaking. When I speak to an audience, say, how many of you have read a book? Everybody raises their hand. But when I say, tell me 3 things you learned from that book, there's often blank faces, because so many of them are their lists, the 10 this, the 12 that, the 15 others, instead of saying, you know, you are, as Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not a virtue, but a habit. And so being able to say, I will lead today with character, with integrity. What would that look like? How would I have character, integrity, and be kind? Because culture is not the words on the walls. It's the happenings in the halls. It's what the people in the organization do. It's how they treat each other. It's, I go to organizations and they have a poster, team, team, team. What do you think of that, Doc? And my answer is, let me watch you for 15 minutes. I'll tell you if you're a team or not. And I'll tell you why, or I'll tell you why not. And I think that when you look at human resources leading development, that's the core, I think, is helping expose people to concepts, ideas that have practical value, pragmatic. I can put that to use, not when the crisis occurs, but every day, because a crisis occurs for the people within the organization every day.
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you exhausted of the war for talent cliche? The problem is, when we hear a cliche, it usually exists for a reason. However, we think it's time for a fresh approach to the talent crisis. That's because at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing phenomenal HR and people candidates. And guess what? We think we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process. That's because we're not just recruiters, we're strategic partners dedicated to finding HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. So let's break the cycle of frustration together. Partner your talent acquisition strategies with JGA Recruitment and experience the difference in service, excellence, and results. No longer do you need to suffer the costs associated with a poor hire, because with over 100 five-star Google reviews and already trusted by many of the world's leading brands, why don't you take action today? Contact us at jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can help transform your HR and people teams. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, you can sign up for our weekly HR newsletter that's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. Let's revolutionize your HR talent acquisition strategies together and make the war for talent a cry from the past. Visit jjrecruitment.com to find out more. Yeah, I think it comes through in the way you talk really eloquently. But one thing I loved about the book, and actually let's bring it into an HR context here, because what we're seeing in the world, not just in the UK, but certainly seeing it in the US as well, we're seeing lots of people change their values, putting slogans and words. We're now X, Y, and Z. This is what we believe in. But there's very easy to put a slogan out there. It's much harder to walk the walk. Very easy to talk the talk. And I think we've seen a little bit of that. And it's infiltrated the world of human resources, because we know that the Gen Zs of this world in particular, and we're going to have the other generations do the same. They're now looking at companies and what do the companies stand for? What have they got written on their website? But sometimes they're just words. We've got to make sure that the culture within those words is also being embodied. There really is in a psychologically safe space, that there are cultures of belonging and inclusion, all those things. And yet there's still a gap between what many companies will say they do and actually what's being delivered. And you have a great chapter in your book, which is slogans are worthless, but actions are priceless. Well, if you can tell me a little bit more about that from that HR perspective.
Well, I think the slogans are worthless because they're the words on the walls. And, actions are priceless because they're the happenings in the halls. It's how people interact with each other. So when people ask me, and they ask me all the time, how do I select a job, a position, a career path? My answer is follow your heart and follow your deep joy. When our boys were younger, we had 3 boys, my beautiful and brilliant wife, Maureen, and I. And when they were younger, every day I was home, I'd drive them to school. And when I dropped them off, I said precisely the same thing to them. One more step in the journey of discovering where your deep joy intersects the world's deep needs. I swear I said this to them. They prefer to take the bus, as you might guess. They don't want to hear that, particularly from their father. But the key is, your deep joy. Not the world's deep needs, because the world's deep needs are unfathomable, infinite. There's so many things that can be done. Which are the ones that resonate with you, whether you call it true north, deep joy, sense of purpose, and reflecting that deep joy in the daily work. So I show a picture whenever I'm talking to people of someone jumping for joy going into work, in particular, a young female physician. And I say to my audience, is that you going into work or going home? Because that's not the same thing. We deserve, and everyone in your audience deserves to jump for joy going into work, not just going home from work. because they're expressing their deep joy when they're there. So which job to choose, which career path is look inside, trust your heart, find your deep joy, stay consistent with that deep joy. And through the course of the day, realize that you're there for a purpose. And that purpose is to make sure that your deep joy, not somebody else's, yours, is being expressed as fully as you possibly can. So that at the end of the day, when you leave work, whether it's driving a car or riding a motorcycle or taking public transportation, you say to yourself, what did I leave in there? What did I leave in that job? And what you left was a legacy. And that legacy is the ability to interact with person by person, team by team, problem by problem, crisis by crisis. And how did you innovate for the good of the people that are there? And as long as you're doing that, honestly, job title doesn't matter. Position in the organization doesn't matter or shouldn't matter. But the sense that that's my job is the most important thing.
Can I ask a question then? So I'm thinking in the listening to what you've just said there and putting it into the context of mindset. So think about the woman that's dancing on the way into work. It's very easy sometimes we see others in that moment of joy and we feel like we can't have it for ourselves. But often there's a mindset blockage there in making that happen. I think it's Michael Neal who once said that every feeling lives in the shadow of a thought. If we change the way we think, we can change the way we feel. And in theory, that makes sense, right? Usually we feel angry if we've just thought about an angry thought, or we've seen something, we've been cut up on the freeways you mentioned earlier. Or equally, we see something and that brings joy to our heart, and we feel something we never knew was going to follow. And but those feelings are always inside of us. It's the way that we let them out. The reason I mention that is everyone listening to this is going to want to have more joy in their lives. They're going to want to have more joy in their work. But when they are faced with the pressure, burnout often in the world of HR, different stresses, what are some of the strategies that they can deploy to help them stay on the right side of joy, the right side of that positive mindset? And I imagine this must have been true in the NFL as well, where performance is often very closely aligned with how you're feeling emotionally. That lack of confidence, suddenly lack of confidence means poor performance. Certainly in the world of other sports, I'm sure it's the same in NFL. So I imagine a lot of the work for the professionals in professional sporting associations as well is we want to get these people feeling confident again, which can be hard if you're on a losing streak or you're missing games or whatever it might be. So what are some of the strategies you might be able to help our listeners with to cultivate that positive mindset when times are difficult?
Well, I think times will always be difficult in times of crisis, and we're always in times of crisis. As I said, no innovation is completely successful. But if it's true to your deep joy and true to the purposes of the organization, then it's directionally the right way to go. That's why I say make failure your fuel. Abby Wambach talked about that in her great Barnard College commencement address. And I learned a lot from Abby. I spoke with her several times on the same dais. And, I think about my NFL players. I've known 10,000 NFL players through the course of my career. And at any given time, 2,500 of them, because that's how many there are. If you look at how much time they spend on the practice field or in a game and compare it to how much time they spend in the film room watching film, breaking it down and saying, here's what went right, but here's what went wrong. And I can tell you, it may surprise your listeners. My guys don't, and I know it's true from talking to Abby and Mia Hamm and others on the U.S. women's national team. They don't focus on their successes. They focus on their failures. They use failure as a fuel to say, how do I get better? And that's not to penalize yourself or become depressed or become overwhelmed by failure. It's to say, of course, there was some failure, but here's how we could do it differently. Here's how I've seen it done. How can we have A team members coach B team members back to the A team, back to the deep joy that they had? And so that becomes infectious. That becomes a way of thinking, a way of life, a way of driving forward, understanding that if you can't forgive yourself, you can't forgive anyone. And being unable to forgive others is no way to live, particularly in HR and leading development, where failure will always occur, and it has to be our fuel. in terms of how. So instead of seeing someone come in and say, I've got a problem, well, that's not a problem. It's an opportunity for us to be able to help lead them through how they can think differently, act differently, and do so in a way that leads back both to their deep joy and the organizational deep joy as well. So it really becomes a way of not just thinking, but as you said, a way of acting on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's great. And funnily enough, we had I mentioned at the start of the show. I don't know if you ever got a chance to work with Marcus Ogden. He was on the show in January 2022, talking about a similar kind of subject, really, about what it takes to achieve, your goals in business and life. And he, similar to you, didn't really use the word leadership in the same way. He was very much around teamwork. And there's this NFL superstar on the show, and he's like, Nick, I can't achieve anything without my team. Everything's about team. We're one and the same. Doesn't matter if you're the quarterback or the line. It doesn't matter, right? None of it works unless we all come together coherently and we work together. We support each other. And he was really big on team, and you can understand why, being a part of an NFL career for sure.
Well, Marcus is a great guy and a brilliant mind, and I try to make the point. The third chapter, when we talk about teams and teamwork, it becomes critical to understand that, because there's a paradox, and that is, it's one thing to have a team of experts, smart people, well-trained people, even well-intentioned people. But Marcus would tell you that's not the same as having an expert team. So particularly in HR L&D, you can train smart. You can make people smarter. But those skills of working together as an expert team, the seams of the team, the ability not just to say team, but to play team. So that's why I say, when they say team, team, team on the wall, let me watch what happens in the hall, and I'll tell you if they're a team or not, why they are and why they aren't. A lot of it goes back to trust, not to keep banging that drum, but it is understanding that need for failure to move forward. And, Bill Belichick famously said that talent sets the floor of a team, but character sets the ceiling of a team. Don't build resumes, build relationships. Yes, you have to have a certain amount of talent to be on the team, to be on an NFL team or World Cup team or anything else, and the teams that your folks represent. But look for the character. Look for how they're going to interact in times of crises. That'll show you the real window into who you really want in that organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You mentioned failure. There's an acronym. I don't know who to credit it to, but someone once told me that fail is first attempted learning. And it's just a nice way of thinking.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
Yeah, first attempted learning.
Yeah, I heard that one. I like that a lot.
Something that's
I'm going to attribute you, Nick.
Well,
in my talk.
By all means, that'd be great. First attempted learning, and you heard it here first. One thing that just resonated there when you're talking about the team piece. There's a chapter in your book, and apologies if I misquote this, because I read it in prep and I haven't got it in front of me, but I remember it because it spoke my language in the world of recruitment. And you have a section in the book that talks about re-recruit your team. And I thought, you know what, this is where it's relevant again to the HR people listening to the show, because when you say re-recruit your team, you break the team down into, in inverted commas, A players and B players. But actually what we're really talking about is coaching. Now, coaching is absolutely an imperative part of an HR professional's remit these days. They're coaching the workforce, they're coaching their colleagues, coaching people through crisis, coaching people through difficult things. It could be through organizational development, merger and acquisition, a change of redundancy, whatever it is, they're coaching performance within the workforce every given day, pretty much. And actually, that's the solution without giving everything away, so I'm going to give you the floor back. But you say in your book, you need to think about re-recruiting your team, and you link that very cleverly to coaching. And I don't want to get it wrong, so I wonder if you could just bring that to life a little bit for our listeners, because I think it's really relevant to the people that listen to the show.
Like most things in my life, the good things come from my wife. And when I proposed to Maureen, she was a newborn ICU flight nurse, and I was a pediatric trauma fellow. Took her we trained in Utah, and I took her to the top of a ski run and proposed and said, "Will you marry me?" And she said, "Yes, but you have to re-recruit me through the course of our marriage." Well, nice. Nick, I didn't no clue what she was talking about, but if she's going to marry me, I'll figure this one out. And I have for 46 years. And that's true in our organizations as well. And that is, we have to, workforce staffing, massive issue, retainment of our best talent, massive issue. We're in the midst of the ability of people to move from place to place to place. And so re-recruitment simply means we all recognize A team members, people who, when you see their face, when you hear their name, when you see them down the hallway, you say, well, great, it's going to be a great day today. But those people have attributes, definable attributes and reproducible attributes. We have B team members as well that, maybe we're not quite as enthusiastic about seeing them. And sometimes, unfortunately, C team members. So number one, re-recruit your A team members, meaning every time you see them do something that's positive to the organization, compliment them right then and there, preferably in front of other people, to say, that was a great job. I just saw what you did. Would you mind talking about that in our next team meeting? Because that's what we aspire to jump for joy going into work. B team members usually are A team members that have lost their way, have lost their sense of deep joy, or don't have the disciplines that the A team members do. So help re-recruit those B team members back to the A team. And for example, somebody as a coach, there's no teams without coaching and mentoring. Someone comes and says, I have a problem. This didn't go well. I didn't handle it well. And the answer is, great. Thank you. That's what I'm here for. Thank you for bringing me. You didn't bring me a problem. You brought me an opportunity. And one of the first things I say to them is, tell me about a time when you knocked it out of the park. Tell me about a time when you really felt as an A team member that you're jumping for joy. This is your deep joy at work. Now tell me, what was the delta between you jumping for joy and this problem? And then a question that I think every HR person should always have right there is, what would have to be true in order for you to have jumped for joy instead of the outcome that you got? Because it means that there's a discernible difference. It's not an idea, it's an action. What I could have said, what I could have done, how I could have said it. For example, if I've got an issue that I'm dealing with and I say to someone, the first words out of my mouth, I need your help. Well, they're going to probably try to help me. I mean, if they're the right person in the right organization, how are they going to say no? Pound sand, go away. But if you say, hey, we've got a problem, or you've got a problem, I mean, they're defensive. They're back on their heels. First of all, it should never be you. It should be we have a problem if you are going to say that. But start with, I need your help. How do we get back to where we were? Now, the C team members, sometimes, my experience, most C team members just misunderstood their deep joy. They signed up for a job that actually isn't their job to do. It is an important job, but it's not their job to do. And helping, particularly in HR, helping them find what is their deep joy. Where could you work in this organization? Or is there another business you should be in as opposed to this one? And those all have dignity and honor, even if you say, well, the C team members create turnover. Well, you know what? That's a failure in hiring. In my opinion, that's a failure in hiring. How do we go back and say, how do we take that issue and assure that we identify the right people for the right jobs in the right organization in the first place?
I get the sense, just from that response, that you would be a wonderful person to work for. You'd definitely inspire me, for sure. And just listening to the way that you articulate the question or the response. So something, it triggered something.
Yeah, just to stop you for a second, no one works for me. They work with me.
Well, that's exactly why I'd love to, but I get it for sure. But I like that response as well. There was something that Rich Litvin once said. He's a coach. He said that coaching is what we used to call leadership. I wanted to bring that because you've just given a great coaching response, and where that resonates or where that sits with you, knowing you've just written a book, The Leadership is Worthless, but we have just talked about the benefits of coaching. We need coaching in every team. Coaching can really help empower performance. It helps build trust. So is that something you would agree with, that it's almost a term that's replacing leadership? Is it one and the same thing, or are they different?
No, I think they are the same thing in terms of, if it's true that we're all leading in times of crisis, because it is what we repeatedly do. It's what we do, not what we say, that matters. And it's every single person. The answers are not above us, but within and among us. My plea to people is to understand the leader you're looking for is you. It is you. It's not someone above you. That doesn't mean you can't aspire to the behaviors, to the actions, to how they make people feel. But it's impossible to lead in teams, and we all work in teams, without coaching. And so I think they are inextricably bound together in terms of how you lead most successfully. Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski of Duke, who wrote a wonderful quote, such a good quote for my book, that I called him and said, Mike, are you sure you read the right book? I'm not sure you got this book right. But most successful NCAA Division I basketball coach in men's basketball. And yet every year he coached differently, because he coached the people, not the concept. And that's true of all of us. What does that mean? It means we have to coach. We have to constantly coach. And I think we have to be, part of our deep joy has to be problems. Because if people didn't have problems, this happened to me 2 days ago. Somebody came to me and said, oh my gosh, this, that, and that person's complaining, and we got this issue, we got that issue. And I just smiled and said, hey, job security. We wouldn't have jobs if they didn't have problems. I mean, and that's true of every HR person. If there weren't problems, we wouldn't have jobs. And ability to express our deep joy in coaching, mentoring, leading teams, particularly with that gentle hand where they kind of almost don't even know that they've been coached, but they've had doors open for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And you're very humble in the way that you talked as well before. You don't work for you, work with you. It reminds me of, I thought, well, I get this wrong. I think it was Sydney Banks that said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less, which I think is a nice way of putting that way around. I want to bring this round full circle and finish on a point about your book again, because, you know, one of my favorite things that I talk to the coaching clients that I work with is, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And you've changed the way that we should be looking at the term leadership, right? And I'm going to go back to the title of your book, which is Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless. It's a great name for a book as well, by the way. And you give great practical strategies throughout the book. For those that are listening to the show, if they really want to get the most out of the book, and they want to, you know, really want to continue on the journey, and the things you've said today really resonated with them as they have with me today, what's the next best thing they can do? What's the next step they should take? Obviously get a copy of the book, but in terms of taking that philosophy forward in an innovative way, so that they can really be the best version of themselves and find that joy that you've referred to many times throughout today's show, what would you say?
Well, I would say I get and you've asked the question slightly indirectly, but to a point. I get the question, hey, Doc, what's your deep joy? And my deep joy is helping others find, express, live on a daily basis their deep joy. And I suspect at the heart of the matter, for anyone who chooses HR leading development, that's their deep joy as well, to be able to help others find and express their deep joy. To be sure, for the good of the organization, but also for the good of the people in the organization. So one of the nicest things I've heard about the book is, for those who know me, they say, well, it sounded like you talking, which means somehow I've captured the voice I was looking for. But far more important, people who say, oh, on every page, every other page, I found something that related to my life. And I think most people will find that there's not some massive, oh my gosh, epiphanous moment that I never thought of that. But I think and I hope that they will find that, oh, I've never heard it put that way before. I've never seen it tied together that way before. And as you know from reading the book, in the summer of 1958, some of the greatest physicists in the world, with the exception of Einstein and Oppenheimer, who weren't at the meeting, Wolfgang Pauli gave a description of his unified field theory, something which eluded even Einstein to be able to tie it all together. And after he gave his presentation, Bohr, played in the movie Oppenheimer by the great Kenneth Branagh, looked at Pauli and said, "We all agree that your theory is crazy. The question which divides us is it crazy enough?" And so what I would say to your audience is, are you crazy enough? Are you crazy enough to say it's not leadership that matters, it's leading that matters? Are you crazy enough to say the answers aren't above us, they're within and among us? Crazy enough to say the leader you're looking for and every person in your organization is looking for is you? And how do we innovate at the speed of trust in order to make a system work better for the people who are in the organization and for whom they serve? Because my plea is, if you're not crazy, go get crazy, because it takes crazy to do this.
No, well, it's a great way to round off the conversation. I think I loved your response that you get huge satisfaction and joy is the word you use by helping others find their joy. It reminds me of there's a Chinese proverb that says, if you want to be happy for an hour, sleep. If you want to be happy for a day, go fish. If you want to be happy for a year, inherit or win £1 million. If you want to be happy for a lifetime, give to others. And I just think that came through in the response that you gave. And I think also today you've really helped demystify the fear. And I think it is fear that sometimes is associated with the word leadership. People get promoted into leadership roles, in inverted commas, and they're paralyzed by fear because they're in a leadership role. And actually, I think you've done a really excellent job today, both with the book as well, but also in today's interview, of just demystifying what leadership is, taking away some of those concerns, those fears that we have around that term, and saying, look, forget about whether you're in a leadership role or not. It doesn't matter. It's in how we present ourselves and trusting others. It's about leading from the front and being honest to our true values. And if you're compelled to say something, compelled to do something, do it and follow your heart and find joy through that. So really enjoyed today's conversation, Dr. Thom Mayer. I'm so happy I've had you on the show. I've been excited to have you on the show. You followed Marcus Ogden 2 years ago. I've had Alan Stein Jr. as well from the NBA as a coach be on the show. But it's been a real joy for me and I've taken a lot from it. So thank you ever so much for joining me on today on the HR L&D podcast. And I hope my listeners will feel the same way.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure entirely, Nick. I've enjoyed it a great deal. Thank you so much.
And most importantly, if you want to get a copy of the book, of course, there will be a link in the show notes. You can access it straight here from the show. It's called Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless. So do grab yourself a copy. And of course, if you do need support recruiting any HR-related staff, you can come to myself or my team at jgarecruitment.com. Both those links will be in the show notes. Just need to say one huge final thank you to Dr. Thom Mayer for joining me today. I look forward to bringing you the next episode of the show real soon. Dr. Thom, thank you. Today's episode of the HR L&D podcast is sponsored by Deal, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you manage the entire global team lifecycle. From contractors, direct employees, EOR, and more, you can manage them all in one place with Deal. Hire and onboard talent in over 150 countries in minutes, or run payroll in over 100 countries with just one click. Offer competitive benefits, equipment, and equity from a single dashboard. Even customize career roadmaps, performance assessments, and more for your team through Deal's suite of AI-powered learning and development tools. So no matter your global business goals, Deal's team of over 200 legal experts keeps you compliant with local laws every step of the way. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deal is built to meet your unique global HR needs. Ready to transform your global HR? Click the link in the show notes to book a demo with Deal today. That's DEEL.